Welcome back to the PFF NFL show, and we have a special show for you guys today in honor of our free agency guide dropping on this Wednesday, January 24th. We're going to do a special little free agency preview breaking down our top 25 free agents available, some best fits for them, where we see them possibly headed in free agency. You can find all of that in the free agency guide. You can find the top 50, actually, notes, stats, grades on all these guys. If you want to get it, go to join.profootballfocus.com and sign up for an Edge subscription. It comes with that package. But let's get right into it. Number 25, William Hayes, the Miami Dolphins defensive end, formerly of the Rams. Seems like he barely ever sees the field, but when he does, incredibly productive. One of the best runs, one of the most complete defensive ends in our grading system over the last half decade. Had an 85.6 grade last season. Where do you see being a good fit for him, Steve?
Well, we have him down as a best fit for the New Orleans Saints, and I think that makes a lot of sense given that the Saints do need help on the edge opposite Cameron Jordan. And I think Hayes at this point in his career, he's going to be a one-year deal type of guy. Just see if he can remain productive. He's excellent against the run. And he's more of this late bloomer type. I mean, he's kind of come out of nowhere the last 4 or 5 years, and we've been calling him one of the most underrated players in the league, and he continues to be that. I think he's a perfect 1 or 2 year type of guy. Get a lot of good early down run snaps, some underrated pass rushing ability. Ultimately, I think you get him to a place like New Orleans. You draft a young guy, and you have a pretty nice defensive end rotation with those guys and Cameron Jordan.
Yeah, he does seem like he's going to be a guy who I at least hope goes to a contender because he really never has been over the course of his career on a contender. And like you said, he's only 32 years old. Will turn 33 this offseason, but hasn't seen his play slip whatsoever. Didn't see it slip this year in Miami. If he can go to a contender, play 500, 600 snaps, that could immediately put some team over the edge defensively. Yeah, I think the Patriots also could be an interesting player here with what he can do from a 3-down perspective.
His grades over the past 6 years have actually been incredible. He's been over 80 in overall PFF grade for 5 of the last 6 years, and the 6th year was a 79, so it's not like it was far off. This year, actually, in terms of an efficiency standpoint, may have been his best season. It was an overall grade of 85.6. He is a fantastic run defender. I think he does bring a lot of pass rush as well. He's just a really good kind of power 4-3 end. He's just a genuinely underrated player perennially for some reason. Maybe it's because he thinks dinosaurs were all made up.
That's not helping his cause, that's for sure. But yeah, he only 271 snaps this year is all he played, though.
Reminds me a little bit of Jason Hatcher a few years ago, who didn't have his first breakup season until he was 27, 28 years old.
Okay. In play, not the dinosaur thing.
No, not that. Okay. I think he believed in the dinosaurs.
Okay.
Yeah, but Hayes, more of a late bloomer. Took him till about year 5 before he put together that stretch, like you're saying, of the 80-plus years. And a contender, I think, makes a lot of sense for him.
All right, on to number 24, Kyle Fuller, the cornerback from the Chicago Bears. Finally put it all together in his last year there in Chicago. 84.3 overall grade this past season. Sam, what do you see as a best fit for him?
He's a really interesting guy because, you say put it all together in this final year with the Bears, and I don't even know if he did or if he just put it together in stretches this season. He had some single games were phenomenal. Had some incredible performances actually in this season, but there are also some bad games in there as well, and some average play that we've seen from him before. He's, I think, a really tough evaluation for a team like the Bears because you finally saw this elite play that you presumably thought he had in him when you drafted him in the first place. But did you see it enough to be able to commit big-time money to him, which is what he's going to want coming into this contract year? I think the Houston Texans make a lot of sense for him. I think they've got some fairly desperate need at cornerback. Having looked stacked there just a couple of seasons ago, it suddenly has all fallen apart pretty quickly, and they need an injection of some quality coverage there.
Yeah, he almost reminds me of Dre Kirkpatrick a season ago where, he sort of put it all together, but it, like you said, not so much so that I'm going to go give him the $55 million deal, that Dre Kirkpatrick got. I'd be worried to be that team that commits the money to him. I'd rather commit it to a guy who's out in free agency now that you've seen do it for multiple seasons in a row. Fuller I get the first-round pedigree, and he's going to get a big deal because of that, but still worrisome.
And those are the guys that tend to be perfect matches for the franchise tag. You know, it's a lot of money, but it's only for 1 year. And if he backs it up, fine. If he doesn't, you move on again in the season's time, and it's somebody else's problem. Instead of tying yourself to the guy, you know, for 5 years, $55 million or whatever it is.
Yeah, he's the whole put it all together thing too. He still gives up a lot. He still gives up a lot of plays. I mean, he made a lot of plays on the ball last year. 17 pass breakups that led the league. That was more than double than what he'd had in his 2 previous full seasons. He had an injury year in there in 2016. Also missed 21 tackles. So there's a little bit of boom or bust to his game too. So the thing that he did well last year was making plays on the ball. Still gave up 730 yards in coverage. So we're not talking about a shutdown guy, so to speak, but maybe a guy that's come into his own as a potential playmaker.
Playmaker, yeah, for sure. All right, on to number 23. Dontari Poe had a little bit of a resurgence there in Atlanta. 81.5 overall grade after he had sort of lost his every down effectiveness in Kansas City. Played a little bit fewer snaps this year than usual. Still almost hit 800 during the regular season, though still, like I said, can play all 3 downs. And played some 3 technique this year. I think he's a good fit for a team that likes to, you know, play sides with their defensive tackles. That could play him at the 1 and at the 3. I don't see him as a pure nose tackle at this point in his career anymore. I don't know if you agree, or Steve, what do you think a good fit for him would be team-wise?
I like that. So you want a versatile defense, or a defense that's looking for versatility, a guy that can do both. We have him down for the Lions, and I think if you're anticipating Matt Patricia to take over that job, I just mocked Vita Vea to the Lions in my most recent mock, which is a similar, you know, that's going to be one of the guys that Vea gets compared to, 340 pounds, athletic. So if you don't necessarily want to spend that first-round pick on a big interior defensive lineman, I think Poe would be a really good fit for the Lions. It's too early in Poe's career to be this, you know, on like the Ted Washington retirement, give me, you know, 1 year deal tour, right?
Yeah.
Just being like 1 year nose tackle here, nose tackle there. Like Poe probably deserves some sort of longer term deal, and he might not be exactly what people hoped he would be coming out of Memphis as far as that first round pick goes, but he's a solid player, and like you said, he can do it in a couple different places along the defensive line.
And his thing last year signing that 1 year deal in Atlanta was, I was getting essentially screwed out of statistics by the way the Chiefs pass rush. You know, I was being told to just hold my gap, not try and generate any kind of pressure. And so we never got to see what I can do as a pass rusher. I was just a run defender and a guy who stood in the middle of the line. And the idea was he would go to Atlanta and he would show us, this is what I've got as a pass rushing force as well. And a little bit maybe. You know, he hasn't exactly turned into Reggie White there, but there is more pass rush there than we saw in Kansas City.
Yeah, it's still for nose tackle, a plus pass rusher, but he's no 3 tech. He's not a guy who you can just send him out there as a pure pass rusher and expect him to, get the job done. He's still somewhat limited by his immense size, but yeah, I do think he's going to get himself probably a longer term deal than he got before.
Amazing note that you put in here, Mike. 5,400 snaps since entering the league in 2012. I mean, there's no perspective for that when I say it, but no nose tackle is even close to that. He has some years where he's up in the 800-900 range, where a lot of nose tackles are like 400 or 500. There is something to that, you know, being out there every single down, even if he's not as productive as some other guys on a down-to-down basis.
All right, on to number 22, Packers safety Morgan Burnett, coming off a little bit of a down year, 77.3 overall grade, but has been one of the better box safeties over the course of the last half decade. Where do you see a good fit for him being, Sam?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams now that need that kind of box safety. Everyone's looking for that single high guy that can make that whole defense tick, but in order to get the single high guy, it means somebody's playing in the box. And though that is an easier position to fill, it doesn't mean teams don't have
still valuable.
Subpar players there as well. I think the team that's shifted in that direction and took a shot at that guy last year is the Tennessee Titans. They brought in Jonathan Cyprien off the back of one of these fantastic seasons playing down in the box for Jacksonville, and he really hasn't backed it up this year at all. He's been, I guess, marginally above average against the run, but hasn't been able to do anything in coverage underneath. They've had Kevin Byard over the top playing fantastically as a single high guy. If you team him with somebody like Morgan Burnett, who is a capable all-round safety that could play underneath, I think that suddenly becomes a really formidable-looking secondary moving forward.
Yeah, Cyprien look like a box safety in terms of the fact that he can play the run, but at no point in his career did he ever warrant that contract because he just never was good in coverage. Even as a linebacker, he would be somewhat below average in coverage. So I do think they need, obviously, from their performance in the playoffs, to upgrade that secondary if they want to compete in the AFC. So, yeah, I like the Burnett call there for sure.
Man, it feels like he's been around forever. He's 2 years removed from, in 2015, ranked 5th among safeties against the run, 87.5. 2014, number 1 grade against the run, 92.4. If you look at his career trend in grades, a little bit of a decline the last couple of years. I think he was lost in coverage at times, but again, he just feels like that guy later in his career, filled that one specific role. He was a little lost in zone coverage last year, so Titans play a lot of man historically. We'll see what they do defensively. Could fit that very specific role for them or another team as that pure box safety.
Also, Casey Hayward, Mike Hyde last 2 years, you want to sign guys from Green Bay secondary.
Yeah, and there we go. There's your analytics.
Sign guys playing for Dom Capers. All right, on to 21 here. Dion Lewis, the running back for the Patriots, coming off a career year with an 87.4 overall grade. A lot of teams could use the services. The Patriots could still use the service with what he does for them. But, Steve, where's a good fit for him outside of New England?
This will be a fascinating one to see if New England does really see his value. I mean, now, you look at Dion Lewis, he broke out in 2015 for the Patriots. He had more carries this year, though, than he had in his entire career leading up to it. He just hasn't been on the field a ton because he did get a late start and had some injuries. I think you look at a team like the Giants, though. They've been looking to fill that running back spot for quite a while now. Lewis can run between the tackles extremely well. He runs their simple, gap scheme in New England quite a bit, and it's between the tackles. He's that guy that can knife in between blockers and just maximize what you have, and then he's good in the pass game as well. Very shifty. So I think Lewis, it'll be an interesting market to see if teams go to get a guy that could be a 3-down option.
He's changed his role within that New England system over the past few years. They have one back to do everything. They don't really have backfields by committee as much as backfields by facet.
Right.
So you have the James White game or the LeGarrette Blount game when he was playing there, and it's a different guy for every kind of game plan. And Dion Lewis started off as that kind of scat back option, the guy that would take the dump off passes and make people miss for fun as a receiver. And now this year he's morphed into really an every down back, or the running back threat, the guy that's going to take the ball between the carries and make things happen that way. And the weird thing about that is that he isn't the body type you expect when you picture that guy. You picture the between the tackles runner as the 6'2", 235-pound guy, not the 5'8", 195-pound guy. So there's going to be, I think, it's going to be very interesting to see if other teams see him as that back. If it's just a New England thing, they realize he could do it and they gave it to him, or if another team is happy taking a guy that small. And it's not just the height thing. Emmitt Smith was a short running back. Barry Sanders was a short running back. But those guys were both well north of 200 pounds. He's a light, small back.
I'll give you a team that needs a playmaker at running back, has a coach who would believe in Dion Lewis and what he can do at running back. Indianapolis Colts. Josh McDaniels.
With McDaniels there. That'd be a really good fit. I mean, if they're looking to move on from Frank Gore, who's also a free agent. I mean, he's old. I could see Dion Lewis going with McDaniels because obviously it's an obvious pairing.
And Lewis plus Marlon Mack makes a pretty nice pairing.
And Lewis still the best cut I've ever seen at the NFL Combine. One cut scouting, guys. Dion Lewis.
Ginsu knife.
He was destined. Ginsu knife cut at the Combine.
On to number 20. Case Keenum. Big year for the Vikings. We've talked about him ad nauseum. 85.3 overall grade. And I think we've all sort of come to the consensus that he should be who the Vikings go with going forward. Right?
Well, it's going to depend on the market, on the contract. If this season was enough to push him into crazy money territory, I don't know that you can pay him that. You're in this sort of situation that the Chiefs were in a few seasons ago, where Alex Smith wants $100 million in terms of contract, and I don't know if you can pay that to Case Keenum. So if they can get him back, I think they should try and get him back. But if they can get him back on a contract that has a get-out clause after a year or two, they pay him, even if it is $20 million a year. If they're only tied to that for one season, I think that makes sense. If the only option is Keenum for a deal that's going to keep him there at minimum for 3 years of guaranteed money or whatever, that is a big, big risk. Because as good as he was this year, and even in the NFC Championship game, I don't think he was the problem. He was under pressure half the snaps, which is just an unworkable number. It's just such a risk to put that kind of money behind a guy that has such a limited sample size of being that good.
I'm with you. I think you have to treat him, you have to understand the full body of work. I mean, this was a breakout season for Keenum. There's no way you can just be that confident that, all right, this is who he is. He's a top 10, top 12, top 15 guy year in, year out. And then from a Keenum standpoint, there's that familiarity factor, right? Like he had his breakout season
in that offense in
Minnesota. How many guys have we seen just have that great year and they go out and get the big contract somewhere else, and they're not, you can't change their ecosystem and keep them at the same player.
But even in terms of staying in Minnesota, everything isn't set because Shermer is now off
True.
to the New York Giants. Who knows what that offense is going to look like exactly. So things are changing whatever happens, which is why it's such a big question mark if you're going to get that kind of guy, that level of play again in 2018.
So do you franchise tag him?
No, I wouldn't give that much money.
I think even you're going to need to give that much money to keep him around.
Whatever they have the space. They have $57 million in space next year.
I get so. Look, the 1 year space thing isn't. It's not a hindrance. So maybe you end up doing that and you buy some time.
I mean, either a franchise tag or you have a deal that's structured the way Mike Glennon's was structured, or the way Kaepernick's was structured, the way Andy Dalton's to a degree was structured. That there's a way of getting out of it every kind of year or so.
In an ideal world, that's where all of the quarterbacks that in our head were like, hey, that's a mid-tier guy. So right now you'd put Keenum in the mid-tier, right? All those mid-tier guys would be, 1 or 2 year options that you could just get out of it after, that's where Flacco should be instead of the Ravens being stuck with him forever. So the problem is that you've got that one team that swoops in.
Yeah.
Right? Or the Broncos swoop in. They're like, that's it. We're giving them the 5-year deal or whatever it is that screws up the entire market. A smart market would do what you're saying, make it something you can get out of after year 1 and 2. And then are we looking at Minnesota now looking for their quarterback of the future, or do they try to bring Bridgewater back on a cheap deal as a backup? I think there's a lot to be said there.
The quarterback always has the leverage in these deals because there's always multiple teams out there that need a quarterback desperately. So as much as it makes sense for the Vikings to want this safety net of a deal, it doesn't make any sense for Case Keenum if there's somebody out there willing to pay him a 4-year guaranteed deal.
Very true. The wild card in that situation is they've seen Teddy Bridgewater for now 8 weeks, fully healthy or whatever. If that's who they go with, that would be interesting because that would mean he's at least looking good in practice. And like I said, no one's giving. People might give Keenum a deal. People might give Bradford a deal. I don't think anyone's throwing big money at Teddy Bridgewater with what we saw with his knee. So that will be interesting to see how that plays out. All right, number 19 here, Tyler Eifert, the Bengals tight end, former first-round pick, yet has only played in his 5-year career 2,064 snaps. So we told you how many snaps Dontari Poe has played. He's played almost 2/5 of that over the course of his career. But the talent's obviously there. Every time he's been on the field, he's looked like one of the best tight ends in the NFL. But the every time he's on the field thing is big in that case. So where do you see as a good landing spot for him, Steve?
Look, any team that really I think he's worth the risk, right? It's a high risk, high reward type of deal. Any team that just needs a playmaking tight end, Chicago Bears, Arizona Cardinals, New York Jets. I think there's a lot of different teams that could be in play there. Maybe the Bills, the Ravens. There's a lot of different teams. I think he's in the market. It's just a matter of if you really need a tight end, you take that risk, throw a little bit of money at him, and then have some sort of backup plan for the injuries. Because like you said, when he's there, just look at Andy Dalton's numbers. Like when he's there, when he's not. 2015 was Andy Dalton's best year. That was Tyler Eifert's healthiest season. He was outstanding that year. A good tight end is a difference maker, and Eifert has already showed that he can be that difference maker in the middle of the field.
Yeah, there are, like you said, a lot of great landing spots for him, a lot of tight end needy teams. It's just who is willing to take that risk, because when you haven't put together a full season over 5 years, like I'm not a big, he's injury prone type of guy. I think injuries are mostly random, but some people are, and he 100% qualifies as that.
The 2,000 snap thing is crazy. Jason Witten has more than that in the last 2 seasons. Just 2 years. It's 2 full seasons is basically what it is. And yeah, he is undoubtedly made out of whatever the same material Chad Pennington's knees were made out of, except it's all of Tyler Eifert, and that's a problem. You can't rely, especially a tight end where these guys, by definition, are almost always working over the middle of the field. They're going up against big interior guys when it's come time to blocking. You are taking bigger shots than, a small, shifty wide receiver is. You need to be able to withstand that. And so far, it doesn't look like he can.
Yeah, so we'll see where he ends up. On to number 18 here. Giant center, Weston Richburg, missed most of this past season with injury, but was a PFF Pro Bowler way back in 2015, his second year in the league. Has that talent, is one of the best pass protecting centers in the NFL. Steve, what do you see as a good landing spot for him in free agency, or does he go back to the Giants, who really can't afford to be losing too much off on their offensive line?
Yeah, I mean, I think the Giants would certainly like to keep him. You just keep the pieces you have in place while you're trying to build everywhere else. I think crosstown, the Jets could certainly use a center. I'd also look to the Rams. They had John Sullivan this year. Toward the end of his career, getting old, I've pegged the Rams to potentially draft a center toward the end of the first round, and I think they'd be in the Richburg market as well because, like you said, at his best, he is one of the better centers in the NFL.
Wasting a first-round pick on a center. No, thank you. That's not
wasting a first-round pick.
I'd much
10-year
rather
starter,
sign
Mike. It's a 10-year starter.
And yeah, the Rams is a good call. I like that one as well. But he can. I don't think he's scheme limited. I think he's pretty much can go anywhere. But it is concerning that after that, it just has not been able to replicate what he did in year two. So it'd be interesting to see where he gets money-wise in terms of amongst centers.
Pretty powerful guy. I think a lot of the power and gap type teams will really like him. But I think, to your point, I don't think he's necessarily limited by scheme.
I actually think centers are among the most important offensive line positions, not necessarily because a great one.
Among the most, there's three.
Well, if you count left and right. But when you lose a good center, if the guy behind him is terrible, it can completely destroy a line overnight. Matt Burke did it twice in his career, left teams, and the guy behind him was awful, and that line collapsed immediately. And it's happened to a bunch of other teams as well. If you don't have a guy in the middle that's capable of holding up his end of the bargain, pretty much anything you want to do is done.
That is the quickest way to the running back, is through the center. So I can't argue with you on some of those.
It's physics, Mike.
Then don't argue. Don't do it.
I'm not going to. All right, on to number 17 then. Sammy Watkins, who's coming off of kind of a down year, actually. Did not in one of the highest level passing attacks in the NFL. Sammy Watkins was sort of a decoy all year long. Did not produce at the level some thought he would. A 76.2 overall grade for him. But I don't think there's any denying that the talent's obviously still there. The guy that he was, in Buffalo, who had a few big seasons there when he was healthy. What team could benefit from Watkins' services, Sam?
Yeah, Sammy Watkins was like the only guy that didn't get the Sean McVay bump this season in Los Angeles. Everybody else that went there had the huge boost in their production, their play. Not so much at Watkins. Actually outshone by Cooper Kupp, the rookie.
And by his former teammate in Buffalo.
He's their clear-out guy.
Robert Woods.
Watkins is their clear-out guy.
At some point, you got to throw him the ball, though, right? Just because of the speedster.
So who would throw him the ball, Sam?
I think the Cowboys make a lot of sense. The Des Bryant thing appears to be coming to a head at some point. Whether it happens this year or not, he is becoming less of an effective weapon there. The biggest thing he brought to the table this year was all the pass breakups on offense, bailing Dak out of some bad throws. Either way, whether Des is there or not, they need somebody that can stretch the field, that can make some big-time plays there, and they don't have one yet.
Yeah, look, Dak, from an adjusted completion percentage perspective and everything, has been a solid deep ball thrower, but he's thrown one of the lowest percentages of deep passes over the last 2 years. I do think Dallas needs to open it up a little bit, whether it's Watkins, whether it's a speedy receiver in the draft. I think they're going to be looking for playmakers. I like that fit in Dallas and just kind of make Dak take some more chances down the field.
I will say, so this is a pretty strong wide receiver class, probably arguably after quarterback, the strongest single position in free agency in this offseason. The 49ers, Browns, Colts have the three teams with the most cap space in the NFL, all very wide receiver needy teams. It would surprise me if all three didn't sign one. I think all three of those end up going and getting someone in this wide receiver class when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I don't like Watkins to the Colts, though. I think there's too much overlap in terms of style with T.Y. Hilton there. The other two definitely make sense, though.
All right, on to number 16, Sam Bradford, the Vikings quarterback, who obviously has his injury struggles well documented this year. At his best, though, that Week 1 game against the Saints, one of the highest graded games we gave to a quarterback all year, looked like he was starting to come into his own in that Vikings offense. That's why we have him pegged as the Giants' possible future starter following Pat Shurmur there. Talk to me about that fit, Steve.
See, I think what you're doing there, here's the only thing that would make that not happen is the Giants picking at number 2.
Yeah.
And knowing that they're going to grab a Sam Darnold, a Josh Rosen. They're going to grab one of those top quarterbacks. Is Sam Bradford at transitional guy status yet? Or if you're just using PFF grades the last couple of years, 2015, pretty solid season in Philadelphia with Chip Kelly, even though it didn't show statistically. 2016, pretty solid season in Minnesota. And then 2017, like you said, pretty much a game and a half, one of which he was broken, using Sam's terms. And the one full game that he played was against the Saints. It was outstanding. Yeah. The QB win of the year from the QB Awards podcast a few weeks ago. There will be believers in Sam Bradford somewhere around the league that are willing to give him a 2, 3, 4-year deal. But if they're not, does he become the transitional guy in New York with Shurmur? I think there's a lot to be said about that fit.
There are those handful of teams who are contenders, somewhat on the contender, front threshold, but just need a quarterback. I think the Broncos would qualify as that. The Jaguars qualify as that. Do you see him being a fit for any of those two teams?
Well, here's the thing. I think Steve said there, just going off PFF grades, I think that's the key term, because I think Sam Bradford's overall status in the NFL is a lot less than we think it should be. I don't think he gets the credit that he deserves for being as good as he has been when he's been on the field. Even going back to that Eagles, in fact, especially that Eagles season, where we're saying, well, actually, it's a lot better than the statistics suggest it was. So I think he may actually be at that bridge quarterback status right now. And it does bring him into play for all these teams that are going to be drafting up high, whether it's the Giants picking at number 2, whether it's the Broncos, who might try again in the draft, having appeared to swing and miss at Paxton Lynch.
They missed.
Well, I know they did, but you got to wonder whether they know yet. But yeah, I think he's in play for anybody that needs a short-term answer at quarterback, but is also going to be in the market for a long-term option.
Here's where I think he is a fit for those teams that have defenses in place, that have pretty solid defenses that can make playoff runs. In that year, 2016, his last full season, he was one of the best in the league at taking care of the football. He was one of the worst in the league at positively graded throws. So there is this conservative aspect to Bradford where he's not going to make mistakes. He's not going to he's not going to add maybe as much value as your gunslingery type guys. But isn't that what the Broncos want, or the Jaguars might want, or those teams that are contenders everywhere on the roster except maybe quarterback? So there is a fit there. But there's other guys that fit that bill on the market as well. You've got your Alex Smiths probably available. You've got Kirk Cousins. You have other guys competing there for that spot.
I'll tell you what's interesting about Bradford is that late in his career, he became the player that he was supposed to be when he was coming out, which is, if nothing else, he is robotically accurate at this point. When he came out, he was one of the most accurate passes I've ever seen, not just in terms of getting the ball to the guy, but getting it in the right spot, hitting the guy eye level right in front of him where it should be.
Yep.
I have never seen anybody coming out that was able to do that as consistently, and that's always what Drew Brees has been so great at. Not just getting the ball to the right guy, but getting it exactly where it should be. But earlier in his career, he really wasn't that accurate. With the Rams, that was the biggest question mark. It wasn't that he was the kind of overall not a great quarterback, which was also true, but it was, where is the one thing that he was always good at? Why is he just not as accurate as he used to be? But certainly with the Vikings, all those best performances, he has had phenomenal accuracy, like dropping the ball over guys in coverage where you can't actually see the guy he's aiming for. That's how good this pass is. And, his adjusted completion percentage numbers have been among the top in the league as well. He's become that accurate passer that he was supposed to be as a prospect.
If I was Sam Bradford, I wouldn't even care about the money, but I would just go to the best offensive line in the NFL that offers me a starting position. I'm not going behind the Broncos O-line. I'm not going behind the Giants, because I'm not going to play 3 games and get hurt again.
Well, he got the last of those. He was the last of the rookie paydays, wasn't he? The big
he
rookie contracts.
He
got a $60 million deal right out of the big.
Him and Stafford are the last 2 guys just been sitting on that pile of money from the rookie contract.
All right, on to number 15, Rams cornerback Trumaine Johnson. After being double franchise tagged by the Rams, I'm doubting he gets triple franchise tag. Coming off a little bit of a down year, too, 74.3 overall grade. But he's got the traits, the size that teams love at corner. He'll be coveted. What's a good fit for him, Sam?
I think there's a couple of fits that make a lot of sense, and they also happen to be the guys with a lot of cap space, which again makes sense. So we might have a bidding war in our hands here. The 49ers and the Colts, both looking for cornerbacks, both like long corners that can play man coverage on the outside. Trumaine Johnson fits that mold perfectly. I think you could see some real cash being thrown at him this offseason.
Yeah, I like that. It was a different scheme for them this year with the Rams with Wade Phillips. He was excellent under Greg Williams. I think you could look at the Browns. Is there some kind of reunion there in Cleveland? They're always looking for playmakers at cornerback. They definitely need to attack that. Also a lot of cap space. You have to attack that in the draft. So I think he'll be coveted again. I know, Sam, you hated that 1-year franchise deal last year, but I feel like that's where Johnson's value is. It's one of those, we don't want to lock him up long term. We'll try to sneak another year out of him. That's what the Rams tried to do. It was okay. Time for them to move on, and time for him to move on as well.
He's the cornerback version of Kirk Cousins. Pay him a lot of money endlessly while we decide if he's worth paying a lot of money to.
Keep buying time.
All right, on to number 14, Jimmy Graham, tight end for the Seahawks. They finally figure out how to use him in the red zone, and now he's hitting free agency. Not coming off a great year, though. Struggled with the drops this season, was not actually all that productive outside of the red zone. I'm going to name a team that I think this is selfishly would love to see. New Orleans Saints. I would love to see them make a play for Jimmy Graham. They finally have some reasonable cap space.
You're just curious what Graham would do in New Orleans with Drew Brees?
I just think like they're that close to a roster that's capable of winning it all, and that would be just like the perfect piece to add back to that offense to bring them. It would just be tough to stop with that running game and then Jimmy Graham. Now he doesn't really help much in the running game, but
I think it's tough to see. It's tough to gauge what he is at this point because he went to Seattle, which was Russell Wilson is a completely different type of passer from Drew Brees as far as the rhythm and the feel that Brees and Graham had versus Wilson and a lot of the broken plays that he likes to create. This was the first year though they really used Graham in the red zone, and he's a huge weapon there. So yeah, I mean I don't know if he's the same productive intermediate and downfield receiver that he was when he was in New Orleans, but if he was back in New Orleans, I think he'd certainly be a lot more productive than he was in Seattle.
Yeah, he is in his early 30s, going to be 32 next year.
Yeah,
he used to play basketball, too.
He did. I don't know if you've heard that before. Another reunion move. It's interesting, the Jimmy Graham with Russell Wilson thing, because so much of the way Russell Wilson plays, it is those broken plays. It's buying time. It's getting out of the pocket. And then once you do that, you're not looking to the areas Jimmy Graham is on the field. You're either looking deep or you're looking sideline. You're not looking to chaos over the middle of the field where Jimmy Graham would probably haul in most of those catches because he's bigger and stronger and a better receiver than the guy trying to cover him. But it takes away so much of what he's good at because of the way Russell Wilson plays. So as much as it seemed like quite an interesting addition on the surface, it just doesn't really fit. Whereas Brees is the opposite. He's going to be in the pocket. He's going to be looking down the middle of the field. The Saints, more than anybody over his tenure, have liked big slot options as opposed to shifty, small Danny Amendola, Wes Welker type receivers. They've had the big slot guys, whether it was Graham in the first place, whether it was Marcus Colston this year with Brandon Coleman. And Coleman, I think, is a free agent as well, so it would make a lot of sense. Well, that too. So it would make a lot of sense for him to go back there. I like it.
You described the best fit. It's Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. You said Russell Wilson doesn't want to throw back across the field. Well, Patrick Mahomes definitely wants to throw back across the field.
Play.
He's going to chuck it up to Jimmy Graham. He'll be a great compliment to Travis Kelce. Boom, Kansas City.
I was going to give you my other selfish pick. It would be hilarious to watch him go to the Patriots.
The New England, with him and Gronk, who are the best two tight ends a few years back, and put them on the same. I could see New England doing that because the last few years New England's gone, hey, let's go get Martellus Bennett.
Weird matchup.
Let's go get Dwayne Allen. They got Scott Chandler a couple years ago to be that other 6'7" guy. I could see them trying to make a play for Graham.
All right, speaking of the Patriots, number 13 is their left tackle this year, Nate Solder. He has the chance to break the bank because he is the only tackle worth the damn hitting free agency. He might be able to name his price, but I don't see how the Pats are going to let him get away, to be honest.
Well, they don't have a backup option.
Yes, I was going to say, because they don't have any secondary options.
When they drafted Nate Solder, it was 2011. It was Matt Light. Matt Light's last year was 2011, and they just essentially were anticipating he's going to retire. Nate Solder, they had a plan in place. Last year, the Patriots drafted 2 tackles, but it was more mid-round, Connor McDermott and Antonio Garcia. They don't have a backup plan for left tackle, so I just anticipate that they're going to lock Solder up, and I just think he's just a solid left tackle. I don't think there's anything special about him as far as pass protection goes. He's probably one of the better run-blocking left tackles. He's really good in their run scheme, and I think that's just what he is at this point in his career.
He is crazy inconsistent, though. And actually, one of the unreported stories of last year's Super Bowl is that Nate Solder seemed to be attempting to get Tom Brady killed through the duration of that game.
Nice.
He was horrendous. That may have been, I assume that was the worst game of his career because it was that bad it would be a problem not to be. But he's had games like that this season as well. I had 7 total pressures against the Chargers, granted against the best pass rush duo in the NFL. But still, there are some very, very ugly games on his tape this season. And it'd be interesting paying big money to a guy that's capable of playing that badly on the biggest stage possible.
It's the blind side, though, Sam.
It is.
It's the name your price tool. He's just, he'll break the bank. No matter if it's the Patriots or anyone else. I don't see how so many teams would be begging for an upgrade at left tackle. If Matt Khalil got what he got, he's gonna be rich.
So at the same point, he has some really good games as well. And if he lands around average, it's creep back toward average. He's an average left tackle. That's pretty much what he is at this point. And a lot of teams would be killing for that.
The Patriots are always this team that doesn't pay the big money to their guy. They let them walk. They find some backup option. They find some other way of getting it done. And with Dante Scarnecchia on the offensive line, they appear to be able to just plug in anybody and somehow either get them playing fine right away with Cameron Fleming this year stepping in for Marcus Cannon, or they're able to develop guys that looked done. Shaq Mason, Marcus Cannon himself. Those guys immediately became good players once Scarnecchia came back. Would they have the guts to just let him walk out the door, take a shot on somebody in the draft, and coach that guy up?
See, I think this position's different. They've had 2 left tackles, essentially, since in Brady's entire career. It's been Matt Light, and they transitioned to Nate Solder. And that's it. A second-round pick in Matt Light, a first-round pick in Nate Solder. It might be – the Patriots are forward-looking as far as how they handle positions and all that stuff. I think there's a little bit of old school in them where they say, no, we want that blindside protector. We want to trust that guy. I think they're going to try to lock up Solder and maybe spend more than they normally would. I just feel like they still really value the left tackle position, and they'll find a way to keep him.
All right, on to number 12, another offensive lineman, this time Giants guard. Justin Pugh, not coming off his best year, 52.5 overall grade, but he's made some PFF Pro Bowls in his past. Has the ability to play some tackle as well, which could come in handy. Who needs a guard at this point that could use his services, Sam?
A lot of people need guards. A lot of people in the NFL
Entire
need guards.
NFL.
And I think that position versatility is big. I think he could be a right tackle and be fine at that, which again is huge, as a lot of teams are in desperate need of right tackles who have never been more important in today's NFL, given how many elite pass rushers line up on that side of the field now. But I think the obvious team that desperately needs a guard help and has for years is the Miami Dolphins. In fact, that entire offensive line really needs some kind of makeover. You've got to assume they're still married to the idea of Laramie Tunsil at left tackle, so let's fix the guards, and Justin Pugh seems to make sense there.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, look, he's a really good player. Last year he was banged up, ended up missing most of the year due to injury. At his best, though, he's a top 20 run-blocking guard in 2015 and 16. That would be huge for Miami and a bunch of teams, like you said. I think he brings up that same debate we asked about Kyle Long, right? Would you rather have a good to really good guard or an average tackle, average right tackle, so to speak? And I think, when you look at positional value, the average right tackle is extremely valuable, and I think Pugh could do that. So it would be interesting if teams might want to make him a right tackle.
It's like a lot of people say it's easy to find guards, though, but that's except for the Miami Dolphins. They don't find it easy to find guards. They have a very difficult time finding guards. So I could see them don't have a ton of cap space, so they won't be able to be players in the bigger names at positions around the NFL. But I think guard is where you could get some value for not a lot of not a huge cap hit next season. I think the fit makes sense.
Even though they haven't got a lot of cap space, the Dolphins have always been really aggressive at making attempts at guys that they feel they need to get in free agency, whether they're in cap position to do it or not. They'll move stuff around, they'll restructure, they'll find the money. They don't
have a lot of cap space.
Exactly, yeah, and they'll find the way of getting enough money to squander it on somebody.
All right, on to our number 11 overall free agents available this offseason. Lions defensive end Ziggy Ansah, coming off a fairly solid season, 80.1 overall grade. That's been him, though, over the course of his career. He's never graded out extremely well for us, even when he was having, his 15 sack seasons. But at the same time, he's always consistently been that above-average guy who can play both run and pass. So, Steve, what teams could use his services?
Yeah, I think Ansah is going to have a pretty big market for him just because there's not a ton of these, perceived three-down edge defenders. I look at a team like Buffalo that is still transitioning from Rex Ryan's 3-4 scheme that had, Rex Ryan has not had good edge defenders ever, other than maybe Jerry Hughes for the couple of years he was in Buffalo. So they're still, the Jets are still trying to find edge defenders from the Rex Ryan years. The Bills, they're more of a traditional 4-3. Ansah's your classic 3-down, 4-3 defensive end. I think that would be a great fit. There's a few teams, though, that could use him. But I think you're right, Mike. Even when he had the 13-sack season, he's solid. He had a lot of attempts. He'll play a lot of snaps. He's not a huge, high-volume pressure guy. Some years those turn into 10-sack years, and other years it's 2-sack years like he had in 2016. But overall, he's a solid player.
Do the Lions need to bring him back? He's probably going to get a fairly sizable contract. Lions have the cap space, but now the Lions have Kerry Hyder, who I think is a restricted free agent, who they'll likely bring back. Now they have Anthony Zettel, who's playing all right. Do they need him as much as maybe they thought they did prior to this past season?
I don't think they need him. It's going to depend where they think his value is. If they're of the same opinion that he's a good, not great player, I think they would be wise not to break the bank to bring him back because they've got guys that can replace that kind of production, plus the draft up to come, and could potentially get his replacement, his heir apparent there. No, I don't think they need to break the bank to keep him around.
Taylor, actually, who's not here right now, our producer, podcast editor, he actually said a really good thing about Ansah. He's like, I can't remember watching a Lions game and saying, oh, man, Ziggy took over that game. Like, that's just not really who he is. He's not a guy who dominates. He's solid game after game, but not a guy who can, like you said, take over a game. And if you're going to pay a guy a lot of money for agency, I think you want that dominant potential.
How many Lions games do you think Taylor's watched?
That's also a good question, but I agreed with the sentiment because I've watched probably more than he has.
Okay.
Probably.
I'm not saying his point's invalid. I'm just saying he might be working with, I saw them on Thanksgiving the last 5 years, and I haven't remembered seeing Ziggy.
If he makes big money, it's going to be because that edge market is relatively thin, I think. There aren't that many relatively young, proven pass rushers out there, and if the top guy goes from the market, he suddenly becomes the option to go.
You think he always felt like a New England type of guy to me, too? He was the guy, I think, when we were talking about mid-season trade options, would New England go and get him? I think that might be an interesting fit if they do try to upgrade on the edge this offseason as well.
All right, let's break into the top 10 here with number 10, Jarvis Landry, Dolphins wide receiver, 82.0 overall grade this last season. One of my favorite stats, though, of any stat this past season. He led the NFL in receptions and did not crack 1,000 yards receiving. He averaged 8.8 yards per catch.
That is pretty amazing.
Where do you land on this?
Special.
There's so much debate over whether or not Jarvis Landry is good.
So he's talented. So he is. He's talented in what he does. What he does is not something that's extremely valuable in a lot of offenses. Catching screens and making plays after it is valuable, but not a lot of teams take advantage of it enough to, pay him $12 million.
So that's the key. It's in a lot of offenses. He is incredibly good at one specific role, which not every offense utilizes, which is the same reason that Wes Welker was never going to break the bank as, a Randy Moss kind of contract offer if he ever walked out of New England. There aren't that many teams that have that role and are willing to take advantage of it the way New England were. So for the Patriots, Welker was incredibly valuable, as is Edelman or Amendola, but they're less valuable elsewhere because there just aren't that many teams that do that. Jarvis Landry is a similar type of player, and for that Miami offense, he's been incredibly valuable. And he does some things amazingly well. He's a great natural catcher of the ball, which sounds like a basic thing for a receiver, but is actually
sounds like you're making something up there.
Harder.
Scouty terms there. Scouty terms.
He catches a ball, easily. He's not, for a guy that works underneath. Wes Welker had the rare drop every week. Landry has less of those.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. But he also makes people miss at a ridiculous rate. He had 17 broken tackles last year on those 112 receptions, 22 the year before that, 26 the year before that. This is a guy that makes a lot of people miss to gain a very small amount of yardage. But if you have an offense that uses that particular type of receiver, he is as good as you can find. The thing is, there's not as many of those as there are people that need number one receiver who functions in every offense.
Yeah, I think the argument against him is like, okay, he had 112 receptions last year, so if you're looking at him as a 112 reception guy, therefore he's elite, you're probably overrating him because, yes, he's just getting handed receptions by the Dolphins in their offense and saying, hey, go make something happen after the catch.
I could have had like 80 receptions in that role.
Right, exactly. Yeah. Now,
how
there
many
is
yards would you gained?
But there is a fair question.
15.
Is he doing enough? 17 missed tackles seems like a lot, but when you have 112 receptions and all of them are inside of 5 yards, should that number be 30? Should he have 35?
Steve asking the tough question.
So it's a fair question. And there's some games, the Baltimore game where they got destroyed, that was one of the worst games I've seen a receiver play, from just him not running through routes and just not finishing plays. So I can actually see both sides of the Landry coin. I do agree, though, you put him in the right role, you do feed him those passes, there's more positive value than negative value, and he'll pull out the spectacular play every now and again. So we put him with the Bears, and I do think with what the Bears might do with Mitch Trubisky's got really good short area accuracy. He was great throwing to Ryan Switzer in the slot at UNC. He could use a really good slot receiver like a Landry and pick up those cheap yards. So I do think that there is a potential fit there.
Yeah, and they use Matt Nagy used wide receivers in the run game quite a bit in Casey in terms of jet motion, that sort of underneath screen stuff. So that, I like the fit there. Obviously, we decided on it, so that's why I like the fit.
That's why we like it. We all agreed.
So we'll see what they end up doing. All right, on to number 9, Sheldon Richardson. Could have been, if we did this list a couple years ago, you would have been a lot higher, but he's had a rough go of it, we'll say, of late. He didn't excel as much as a lot of people thought he might, traveling over to Seattle, playing the 3-tech role there. Still, though, 83.8 overall grade. What's a good fit for if someone can recapture that early career Sheldon Richardson, he could still be a great value signing in free agency. What's a team, Steve, that you could see him going and sort of revitalizing his career?
Well, the free agent guide tells me the Denver Broncos. And yes, Mike, we all decided on that together as well. That would be a nice fit, right? Just add in that extra interior defensive lineman. They haven't really had that interior pass rushing presence like when they had Malik Jackson a few years ago. They haven't replaced him, right? Richardson is still capable of doing that. I think with him, it's a lot of the off the field and the motivation stuff. I think those are the big questions. But on the field, always graded pretty well. Even last year in Seattle, he graded well. Again, we might have had expectations that he was going to be that 88 to 90 type of player, but he's worth trying to see what you can get out of that talent.
Yeah, I think there's a few teams that could use a guy like that. I think the Bears would be another team that was kind of interesting. They were really good against the run on that defensive front, but had nobody really that was getting that much pass rush. Akeem Hicks was getting a decent amount of pressure, and he really isn't a pressure kind of 3-4 end. I think a guy like Sheldon Richardson could definitely do both parts of that coin. He could replace the run stuffing ability and bring some pass rush there. So I think Chicago would make some sense. Also, the Indianapolis Colts, money to burn. We've been saying for ages they need to upgrade their talent up front. I think he'd immediately do that.
One more name for you. Need a 3 technique. Have surprisingly enough cap space to maybe make it work. Minnesota Vikings could be interesting. And that would just be terrifying.
Just keep adding to that deep defense. Yeah, that got torched last week.
All right, on to number 8. Allen Robinson, Jaguars wide receiver, missed most. I think he played like 3 plays this past season before tearing his ACL. Going to be most likely the most coveted receiver in this class still, after what he did early in his career with an even worse Blake Bortles than we saw this season. What's a good landing spot for A-Rob?
Honestly, he's a really interesting candidate because of the stuff you just said, that the ACL and the year before that wasn't good either. That was bad. Blake Bortles was so bad that year that he made Allen Robinson look bad. And Allen Robinson is a guy that's made A, bad Blake Bortles look good, and B, Christian Hackenberg look good as a freshman back in Penn State.
That's the first page of his resume, right?
Yeah. Oh, it should be, yeah. It should be the headline, bold 72 points.
His 2013 stats.
I made Christian Hackenberg look good.
That's in his LinkedIn profile. I made him a second rounder.
But we're now talking 2 years since we've seen good Allen Robinson play. And even though he's still young, that's a lot of time to go between seeing, and not all of it was injury. You know, if it was all just one injury, that would be one thing. But we've seen bad play and then an injury to put all that play in the distance. So I don't know if that alone means that he's a guy that Jaguars wouldn't necessarily franchise. Otherwise, it would make a lot of sense to me for him to be a franchise tag candidate. But they got a lot of production out of receivers all the way through that depth chart this year. Guys much lower down on the depth chart played fantastically. So the Jaguars might actually be prepared to let him walk into free agency and get the big deal somewhere else and not have to franchise tag him. If they do, then it's a case of how much will a team shoot for a guy that has incredible talent but is a couple of years away from displaying it. And we said when we looked through how to fix the Chicago Bears receiving core earlier in one of our PFF Minute videos, they need multiple guys, and they need multiple guys in different roles. So we gave them Jarvis Landry, and we gave them Allen Robinson, and probably a draft pick as well on top of that. I think the Bears need receivers, and Allen Robinson is the one true number one potential guy out there.
Yeah, and then throw on to, like I said, the 49ers, Browns, Colts. They could even toss the Jets into that mix of teams. A lot of cap space. They'll probably be in the play for those top wide receivers.
I think all those teams definitely in play. I think the Jaguars are in this fascinating spot of, okay, we're pretty convinced this defense is locked in for the next couple of years and going to be one of the league's best. I think they need to be really aggressive on offense, not like sit on the ball with 55 seconds before the half type of aggressive. They have to be aggressive building this offense. They got to figure out the quarterback position. Right?
Yeah.
Bortles was solid this year, but you have to be aggressive there. I think they're going to be aggressive with Allen Robinson. I think he's a legitimate franchise possibility, and you just say, look, we're going to trust that what we saw in 2015, where not only is he a great contested catch guy, he can get open at every level. I think they go and try to lock him up.
I hope the agent negotiations every time he walks in the room start with, this guy made Christian Hackenberg look good.
It has to.
Now let's start talking
Let's
dollars.
fire up the 2013 tape and show you exactly what happened Christian Hackenberg's freshman year.
I'll just say, Jaguars, they don't have a ton of space at this point. I'm just not sure if they can fit him and if they want to go out and get a Kirk Cousins, Alex Smith under the cap as well.
Right.
I know you prioritize quarterback over Allen Robinson at this point. So we'll see what they end up doing. All right, on to number 7. Andrew Norwell, Panthers guard and PFF All-Pro from this past season, 88.8 overall grade. And there's one team with a lot of cap space who's also very guard needy, Indianapolis Colts. This almost seems like a no-brainer. Like, I feel like it's done deal already. Like, they can't let Andrew Luck die behind that line again.
Number 2 pass blocking efficiency among all guards last year, and really solid in the run game as well. Yeah.
I don't know what you're talking about. The Panthers only only gave him a second-round tender a year ago. They couldn't possibly he couldn't possibly be any good.
Well, I talked to some beat writers who said he wasn't good and therefore didn't vote for him for All-Pro.
That's how I do my voting.
Inside jokes here at PFF. Sorry to the listeners.
Yeah, I mean, the Colts have definitely they've actually gone after attacking that offensive line over the past couple of years. It's just been too little too late. They haven't necessarily hit on the picks that they've used to try and address it. They've got better in a couple of spots, but they definitely need to fix that sooner rather than later because Andrew Luck's health is no longer a given. This is now a problem that they're having to address and actually fix it before they do kill the guy and have to move on for the future with Jacoby Brissett. So yeah, it does make too much sense.
The key you said was aggressive. Even though the Raiders' offensive line maybe took a step back this year, or perhaps they weren't running the perfect scheme for those guys, but we saw the Raiders put a lot of effort into just bringing guys in and developing from within, and before you know it, they had a pretty good offensive line almost overnight.
Yeah.
So if the Colts are really aggressive about this, you grab a Norwell, maybe Nate Solder goes with Josh McDaniels over to Indianapolis, and boom, before you know it, they're on their way to a much better offensive line. I think they should look hard at Norwell.
For sure. All right, on to number 6, Patriots cornerback Malcolm Butler, coming off a little bit of a down year, 79.2 overall grade, but he's been a PFF Pro Bowler in the past couple years ago. He did not that last offseason, Steve, describe to me what exactly went down with him and the whole restricted free agent, and then he
was disgruntled. I think he wanted a big-time deal.
It's a good word.
Disgruntled employee in New England, which never goes well.
I was going to say that, like, so that just seems like the bridge is burned, right? Like, you don't
rarely
complain
works
about
out.
contracts in New England. I'm surprised he didn't get shipped.
I was going to say, it's amazing he's still there.
Oh, you had a game-ending interception? I don't care. You'll pay for you'll play for your undrafted free agent contract. So then early in the year, he wasn't playing well. They weren't happy about it, to the point where they were publicly acknowledging that he wasn't playing well, losing some playing time. That doesn't happen often in New England either, basically saying this guy's not playing well. But at his best, can play man, can play zone, excellent ball skills. He'll give it up every now and again. He gives up some big plays. But he's definitely one of the better corners, if not the best corner, number one on our list here in free agency, and I think he could play in multiple schemes. And there was also an offseason of just trade rumors. He was almost on his way to New Orleans for a first-round pick, and that was heavily rumored. So maybe you excuse him a little bit because there's a lot going on, and he wants to get paid and he doesn't know where he's going to play, but he's a really good overall cornerback.
If you put this season down to a combination of being disgruntled and unsettled with all the trade rumors and all this kind of stuff, and just kind of give him a pass on it. Mm-hmm. It's 1 year. What the hell? We'll give you a break. And look back the season before, he was legitimately on his way to being one of the best corners in the NFL, albeit one that is going to give up a big play every now and again in a way that some of these other great corners don't do. But he was genuinely fantastic that year and getting better as it went on. And I think that is going to be exciting to a lot of teams that are looking at this cornerback market and thinking this guy has the ball skills. He has the kind of tape and the tape depth and recognition ability to dive in and see what teams are running and be able to break on those. I mean, it's difficult to overstate just how important a play that Super Bowl play was and how much it was a product of understanding what he was looking at, which most corners, forget the interception part of it, most corners wouldn't have been in a position to even break up the pass. But he saw it, read it, and went for it. And it's not just one play. That's emblematic of what he does and what he does well, and that would be huge for a lot of teams that need corners.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I'm surprised he's not on the Browns already. Like, that's just seems like what they did with Jamie Collins, and they need help at corner about as badly as any team in the NFL, and just almost makes too much sense.
Well, I think from New England's perspective, it ultimately worked in their favor for this year in particular that they have him and Stephon Gilmore together instead of whatever that draft pick would have been. So,
all right, on to number 5. DeMarcus Lawrence, Cowboys defensive end, our PFF breakout player of the year, 94.1 overall grade this past season. And this gets to the portion of the list where franchise tag is a legitimate and likely option. I don't see how the Cowboys let him get away without a franchise tag. They don't have a ton of space, but they have enough to franchise tag him, and he's so valuable in what he brought to that defense that I think they have to do it.
He was unbelievable this year.
Yeah.
I mean, he was really, really good. I mean, there was a lot of games that stood out. One that stood out for me, going up against Kansas City, Mitchell Schwartz. That's Jeff Schwartz's brother.
Yeah.
Mitchell's one of the best right tackles in the NFL, and Lawrence almost beat him every single snap, just over and over and over again.
You were just hating on the Schwartzes.
Well, don't tell
What are
them.
they to do you?
Well,
they're going to hear this.
They're good buddy. Mitchell's definitely a listener. Sorry, Mitchell, but you'll be pretty honest about what happened in that game.
Hey, shut down Joey Bosa, so you win some, you lose some.
He's the best. He's the best right tackle in the NFL. And DeMarcus Lawrence only had 5 pressures that day, but it was just over and over and over. He wins with his hands. He can win with speed and length. I mean, I don't know if he's a one-year wonder, but what he did this year was unbelievable.
That is the thing. It's like, is it the Olivier Vernon all over again?
Yeah. This is an obvious franchise tag candidate. 1, because exactly what you said, the concerns about whether he's a one-year wonder. 2, because he is actively campaigning for the money. I know what a sack is worth was a quote out of his mouth. So they're not going to get him to a long-term deal anytime soon. Mm-hmm. And if he does hit the open market, just the fact that he is head and shoulders above anybody else in terms of the edge rusher, somebody's going to pay him the big money. So, and Dallas can't really afford to let that guy walk out of the door because they need that pass rush there.
Olivier Vernon, probably the most realistic comp of a guy that, from a down-to-down production standpoint, was just in a different world in his contract year and has not lived up to that since that point. From a down-to-down standpoint, he's had some production. He's played a ton of snaps, but has not been anywhere near what that contract year was rushing the passer.
Yeah, there are just so many signs to that point to franchise tag here. I just don't see how it doesn't happen at this point. So, all right, on to number 4, Le'Veon Bell, Pittsburgh Steelers running back, coming off a tad bit of a down year after he was franchise tagged this past season. I think he gets franchise tagged again, though. Again, like I said, we're at the top of the list where a lot of guys are in the franchise tag play, and Le'Veon Bell, they just seem to be so far apart in terms of long-term deals that I don't think they can afford to lose him.
I think there's a chance he hits the open market. There are rumors circulating amongst Pittsburgh beat guys, which obviously is where I get all of my information from.
That's the only place to get it.
That Bell, they may not get a deal done, and I don't think they're going to want to pay him that franchise tag. I think they might let him walk out the door. They've got Roethlisberger has already confirmed that he's coming back. Apparently, the last couple of years he was on the fence, but when you lose to the Jags, that will make you come back and take a shot again. Antonio Brown's still there. They've got the receiving weapons. I think you can, as valuable as Le'Veon Bell is and as good as he is, I think they know that they can cobble together a running game in a way they couldn't necessarily do in the passing game if you lost, say, an Antonio Brown. So, yeah, I think there's a reasonable shot that they let him walk out the door.
The tag is expensive, too. I mean, it's $14.5 million if they do tag him. That's, different stratosphere for a running back, but at the same time, he's talent-wise in a different stratosphere himself and what he can bring to the table. So, yeah, I could see him not tagging him, but, man, it would just be wild if he did walk out the door. I don't know. I can't even think of a team off the top of my head that I'm like, that team would just go all in to sign him, but I'm sure someone would.
Yeah, I mean, you don't get guys that are that versatile, that capable. There aren't many of them in the league. There's maybe 2 or 3, and obviously he's one of them, so it makes him one of the most valuable guys out there. The interesting aspect of him is that when you are a guy that can do everything and stay on the field for all 3 downs and be a factor in the pass game and the run game, you get an insane workload, and he has had an insane workload for the past few years. At some point, that does have to take its toll on a running back, and you don't want to be the guy that's stuck paying Adrian Peterson money to a running back who is no longer Adrian Peterson, like the Vikings did.
That's what I was going to bring up. When does the workload become a big issue? Even just this past year, he had 11 more carries, including the playoffs, but 1 yard per rush lower. 5 yards per rush in 2016, only 4 yards per rush in 2017. Is it already catching up to him? And is the Steelers' strategy here, the whole cap space thing, if you have it for 1 year, who cares what you're paying a guy, right? If you have the cap space, who cares what position he plays? Give him the $14 million. It's only for 1 year. And then you just run him into the ground, get everything you can out of him, and then go. Like, strategically, that could be a thing that Pittsburgh's saying. Like, we don't want to lock him up for 4 years. We'll pay him 14 for 1 year if we have the money. Get as much as we can out of him for 1 more year. Maybe it's Ben's the last year, too. I could see that being the strategy again in Pittsburgh.
All right, on to number 3, the quarterback portion of this show. Kirk Cousins, coming off a bit of a down. He's been trending slowly downwards the last 3 years, even though he's still playing at a fairly high level, 78.9 overall grade. He will be the guy who he likely hits free agency at this point. I don't think there's any chance the Redskins franchise tag him. It'll cost them over $34 million in this 1 year. If they do, someone's going to get a quarterback. And where do you see him ending up?
I just want to see them tag him again, just for how funny that would be.
Yeah,
that's all I want. If nothing else happens this free agent period, that's what I want to see happen.
Did you see the quote Scott McLaughlin about? It's essentially saying Cousins isn't special.
Sure,
that was his first statement, and that was part of the reason why they didn't lock him up when he was in Washington. But also he said Cousins is going to do his homework. Cousins is analytical about this stuff. Cousins wants to make Cousins look good. Meaning he knows exactly what the offensive lines look like around the league, what the wide receiver situations look like. Honestly, I think you see that in his play sometimes. Late in games when they have a chance, they're down a couple scores, and he'll just kind of check down and rack up some stats instead of chucking passes into coverage. There's something to that whole deal with Cousins. Now, knowing all of that, where's his place? Where's the place where he can go look good? Because his best seasons, my big criticism of him has been 2015 and 16. His best statistical seasons, he got elevated by all of his playmakers, everybody around him. And last year, there was a point in the season where he was elevating everyone around him, and then down the stretch, I think things kind of fell apart. I think he needs a perfect environment around him to look like a top 10 quarterback statistically. Where is that? I don't know if there's one out there.
I like Denver in terms of, like you mentioned, the playmakers. Having 2 wide receivers on the outside that could win their matchups, that he can basically keep going back to again and again. Now, they don't have near the offensive line that the Redskins had in Cousins' heyday there, but I think at least from a playmaker perspective would be his best bet.
Honestly, I think the best fit for him is in Washington, and they need to just stop messing around with this. I'm not going to pay him money, but I'm going to pay him $74 million so I don't have to pay him money. Lock the guy up. He isn't special, but he's good. And at some point, you have to understand that you are not going to find a better than good quarterback quickly. Mm-hmm. That's the key to all these guys. Whether if you're in this next tier of good but not great quarterbacks, it's so hard to upgrade on those guys. You can't just keep messing around with it. You have to just accept that we are going to pay over market value for a guy that isn't worth it because the alternative to that is so much worse. And I think Washington is the best fit. They have the best offensive line of any of these potential teams. They have a lot of cap space so they could actually make this happen. And you just need to add some more receivers to that group.
And he's had success in that scheme. That scheme that's the same thing that they're running in Los Angeles with the Rams, and they create some nice plays off of play action. They create space for their receivers. I think ultimately that's their best fit too. I like Denver too. I think Denver's going to be in that market for a couple of those. For all these quarterbacks, mm-hmm. I think Denver's going to go hard there, and then maybe draft a Baker Mayfield or draft someone high. But they're going to look to shore it up through free agency because I think they still think they have the defense in Denver to make a run.
Well, he'll definitely be fun to follow though throughout the course. I don't know. I think
Buffalo Bills.
I think he leaves. If I had to bet money right now, he leaves Washington. I think he hits the open market. All right, on to the top 2 here. 2 guys who reasonably aren't going anywhere. Number 2, Jimmy Garoppolo of the San Francisco 49ers.
Patriots
and
best
number
fit.
1, Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints. Yeah, I franchise tag here at least for Garoppolo.
Yes.
Brees likely, I'm not sure if they need to franchise tag him. I think they'll get something worked out.
They just lock him. They just have to sort out a deal with him. I can't imagine Drew Brees hits the open market. We added him into the free agent guide because I think we had to.
He is.
So Joe Thomas is recruiting him for the Browns. One last go around. Let's get Joe to the postseason.
I'm sure that's
the Jets have the cap
space.
Maybe he goes there. No, I don't think. Yeah, any chance any of those guys end up anywhere besides where they played?
I think there is zero chance the 49ers and Garoppolo part ways. There is a minuscule chance that Drew Brees and the Saints part ways.
Why? I think it's 0 on both.
Because they can void that deal. He can void that deal, and it's not them. It's not their choice to lock him up. I think there's a chance
he can't get franchise tag. They can't franchise tag him.
So he can't be franchise tagged. If the 49ers want to keep Garoppolo, and they do.
I get that. I just think Brees is going to say, okay, my best bet's with Sean Payton, my familiarity.
Which is why it's a small, minuscule chance.
I finally got everybody there. I finally have running backs. I finally have a defense. I'm staying in New Orleans.
It would be awesome, though, if he's just he goes to the Browns and it's like $45 million.
Yeah, the Browns will pay me all of the cap money.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty old. I'm going to give it one last shot. I'm going to get Joe to the postseason.
Drew Brees would be the most high-profile free agent quarterback since Drew Brees.
Yeah. Hey, Dante Culpepper was the top that year.
Oh, God.
Well, there you have it. That's the top 25. Make sure to go check out the PFF Free Agency Guide for the whole top 50 and stats profiles on all possible free agents.
350 pages, Mike.
350 pages of it this offseason. Go check that out. Join.profootballfocus.com. Sign up for Edge if you have not, and you'll get that for free. Go do it right now. You won't regret it.
Right now.
All right. We'll be back with a Senior Bowl recap a little later in this week. So you guys have a good one.